Truth Plus Media.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Iconic Sonics. I'm Mike Gastineau, and Iconic Sonics, the show dedicated to the Sonics and their great fans, is brought to you this year by Rise Above, a nonprofit organization that educates Washington's Native youth through sports and especially basketball. NativeYouthRiseAbove.org to find out more about this great organization. Our show is also brought to you by Epic Seats, a trusted local business who has tickets to the events you love in Seattle. EpicSeats.com. Nothing beats Epic Seats. Iconic Sonics is also brought to you by Synonymous Casino and Lodge. Get up to Anacortes and visit the beautiful casino and lodge today. And by Dick's Drive-Ins, great burgers, real Washington potatoes, hand-dipped shakes, and 8 great Seattle area locations. Really looking forward to today's show because we'll cover a lot of things. But we're going to cover in particular an era of the Sonics that we've not talked about a lot, and that is the very beginning of the franchise in the late 60s. And we're going to do it with a guy who is in the NBA Hall of Fame as a contributor. I don't think it's stretching it to say he devoted his life to professional basketball. Rod Thorn, it is great to see you, an original Sonic, a legend within NBA circles, and a Hall of Famer. Thanks for doing this, Rod, and welcome.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mike. Nice to be on with you.
We're all proud of where we came from, and West Virginia is a primarily rural state, and mountainous and mining and blue-collar workers. I'm assuming you take a tremendous amount of pride in the idea that there were many building blocks in the NBA, but 3 of the building blocks came from your state right at one after another. I'm talking about Hot Rod Hundley, Jerry West, and then Rod Thorn. 3 great players came out, impacted the league for years. You in your way. Jerry West played and has been an executive and has done everything. Hot Rod was a broadcaster, which is probably appropriate for him. What about that? 3 guys from little old West Virginia that impacted the league like that?
When you really think about it, Mike, it's reasonably unique. Hot Rod came first, and West was a freshman when Hot Rod was a senior, and then I was a freshman when Jerry was a senior, and we followed each other. And we had another pretty daggone good player that came right after me, and Ron Williams.
Sure.
Who had a very nice NBA career, but West Virginia during those times had some really top flight teams and a lot of very good basketball players.
Regular entry into the NCAA tournament during those years. I know you weren't allowed to play. The rules wouldn't let people play as a freshman. Were you able to practice with West, though? Could you guys all practice together?
You know, our freshman team was probably better than the backup players for the varsity. So we practiced a lot with them preseason. You know, once the season started, not so much. Right. But preseason we did. So I got to play against Jerry a lot, and he was such a fantastic player, Mike. I don't think, people today don't realize just how great he was. He's got to be one of the 3, 4, 5 best 2 guards ever.
It's funny because we always get into who's the greatest, and right now with LeBron on the precipice of catching Kareem for the scoring lead. I mean, you compare games and you compare styles and eras, and the great ones really could play in any era, right? I mean, Jerry West could play today. Kareem could have played in the 50s. Or the greats could thrive in any era.
Mike, I would agree with that. Oscar Robertson, Jerry West were the 2 top guards when I came along, and they certainly could play today, and particularly when you can't use your hands nearly as much today to guard people as you could back in those days. And I would agree with you, Mike. I think the great players, by and large, some probably wouldn't be big enough, to play today as they played, during their heyday. But I think the vast majority would be top flight players today.
Before we get to your stay in Seattle, and it was an important 5 years, the very birth of the franchise, I want you to just to give us a little perspective. I've read it several times, Tall Tales, Terry Pluto's great book about the early days of the NBA. League was a little bit different back then. Talk about your rookie year, your living accommodations with the Baltimore Bullets, because We didn't have to be worried about how Rod Thorn was going to handle his money because there just wasn't a whole hell of a lot of it at that point.
Well, Mike, I was the second pick in the draft. And, today that player would have a minimum of a 2-year guarantee at around $4 million a year. The year I came out, I signed a 1-year contract for $12,500, make the team. It wasn't guaranteed. We travel coach. I can still remember those 6 o'clock flights. The next day after you played, I can recall playing a game in Cincinnati at 1 o'clock on Sunday when we played Saturday night in Baltimore, and we were warming up. I could not feel my legs. But we played 4 games in 4 nights. One time that year, 4 different cities, much different, stayed in motels. If you could have told me then that the NBA would turn out to be what it is today, I would have said you're crazy. It's just an entirely different game and an entirely different league.
And wasn't your rookie year in Baltimore? Didn't you share an apartment with 3 teammates, $30 each for the rent, and 3 beds was all? So whoever got in last got the couch for the night, right?
No, when we had, there were 4 of us to start out with, and we drew straws. There was 1 bedroom with 1 bed. There was another bedroom with 2 beds, and then there was a couch. I drew the bedroom with 1 bed, and the guy who drew the couch was a guy named Barney Cable, who was the tallest of the 4 of us, and he had to sleep on the couch. But during the year, we picked up a player named Larry Comley. He moved in with us, so our $30 a month rent went down to $20.
You don't find too many NBA players paying $20 a month. They get a little more now. It's all different, obviously, but it's fun to think back. So you're in Baltimore, then you're in Detroit, you're in St. Louis. You're kicking around. You're having a decent career. I'm assuming you're having fun. You're playing with some great guys, and then all of a sudden the league expands into Seattle, and you get taken in the expansion draft. What was that like? Was there any I don't want to go, this is going to be a bad team and it's way out west. I mean, what was your reaction when you heard you were drafted by Seattle?
Mike, I was playing in St. Louis, and I was, in a rotation. I was a 7th or 8th guy on the team at that time, and I wanted to stay in St. Louis. We had a very good team led by Lenny Wilkins, who then became a great player in Seattle. And I did not want to be put on the expansion list, number one. And secondly, if I were put on the list, I wanted to go to San Diego because I see Seattle is way up at the, the top of the country. I don't know anything about it. And it was like, oh boy, I hope I don't get picked by Seattle.
And lo and behold, that's where you end up. I did, since I knew I was going to talk to you today, I did 2 things. My friends at Simply Seattle, who are one of our sponsors, they've got all kinds of great Sonics gear. Over my shoulder, you can see the original Sonics logo. That might have been your practice T-shirt that I now own, courtesy of Simply Seattle, with the Sonics and the lightning bolt under it. And then I've got a hat here with the original, the rocket plane logo there, the supersonic logo.
Right.
There you go. So it lives on.
That's it.
You join an expansion team, you're going to take your lumps. What was the first season like? I nobody was drawing 15, 20,000, or very few people were for an NBA game. Then it was only on a special occasion.
Right.
The Sonics, as I look back on it, they had several thousand for most of the games. Was the reaction pretty good to a brand new team and a brand new product?
It was, Mike. And we had, Walt Hazard was our all-star at that time, and he had played, UCLA in the Pac-10 at that time, and, was a name player. But Seattle was great. What a wonderful city to start out with. The fans were terrific. I think we won 23 games maybe that year, but we were competitive, for the most part. And my wife and I, came out, loved it. One of the nicest places I've ever lived, and I've lived in a lot of different places, but Seattle was great.
You had there were a lot of people I want to ask you about who you were either teammates with or ran into, but you had two, I don't know if characters is the right word. One of them definitely was a character running the franchise. The owner was Sam Schulman, and we'll get into him in a few minutes because he had an important role he played in the league with Spencer Haywood. But the other guy was the executive, the GM, the do-it-all guy, Dick Vertlieb, who is one of the great characters in Seattle sports history. I never knew Dick, but I've heard enough great stories about him, and I'm sure you've got some. What was this guy like? As I said, he did everything for the team. What was Dick Vertlieb like?
Manic. He was constantly on the go. He was, the glass is always half full with Dick. Great personality. I can recall the one story I remember about him. We had an altercation one night with Baltimore. Bob Ferry got in a fight with Walt Hazard, and then a lot of people, got in a fight, and all of a sudden here is Dick Vertlieb running on the court, and Gus Johnson, who's a Hall of Fame player, he didn't know who he was, saw him coming and knocked him down, punched him and knocked him down. And I think that's probably the last time Dick ever ran on the court during an altercation, but he was just what the team needed. At that time, he was so up and out in the community all the time, doing good things. And it was a great guy to work for.
I don't know if you remember this, but one of the stories that came out at that time was Vertlieb. And again, he was a marketer. He understood where the NBA could go. And he'd had a little bit of he'd been in LA and he'd seen the Lakers and he saw what it could become. He wanted to name the team the Seattle Olympians, and he wanted the uniforms to be blue and gold and get Olympia beer to sponsor the team. And somehow that got voted down. But I mean, in the Olympians instead of the SuperSonics, you guys could have been running up and down the floor with beer mugs on your chest. It would have been so. I mean, the league needed guys like him, and he was not alone. There were others like him that were willing to, for lack of a better phrase, sell the tickets, pop the popcorn, pour the beers, and then sit down there. And I've heard from people, and I think this is true, Rod, to be a successful executive or a successful owner, you've got to have the passion in your heart for the product. You can't just be a business person, and Dick had that.
Dick had it, as they say, in spades. He was constantly on, constantly up, and as I said, the glass was 20. It wasn't half full; it was way above half full with him.
The fight you referenced, and again, I read about this. I think Al Bianchi was involved in that. I think you said that I think Gus Johnson hit Al Bianchi too, and that he hit him so hard that Bianchi's glasses were imprinted on his face for a week, right?
His glasses were imprinted on his face for about a week. Gus Johnson was nobody to fool around with.
and this was the guy. He was not the Wizard. We're talking about there were two Gus Johnsons.
The Bullets.
The Bullets guy.
This is the Bullets, not the Wizards.
Yeah, but not the Gus who came along later with the Sonics, though, and was a part of their great. That's Gus Williams I'm thinking of. I got Gus Johnson, the broadcaster, Gus Johnson, the Bullet, and Gus Williams, the Sonic, all swimming through my brain right now. Three of the guys you played with are incredibly interesting stories to me, and I know a little bit about them, but I'm curious to hear from you. And I think fans, when they think back to '67, will remember these names. There's a guy named Plummer Lott. He came from Seattle University. He had a decent NBA career and then went on to be a judge in New York State. He's had an incredible life and an incredible run. Tell me a little bit about Plummer Lott as a player and as a person.
Well, Plummer was a terrific athlete to start out with. Great NBA body, terrific, at running and jump with most in the league. The second game we played of the year, we lost our first game with we played the other expansion team, lost at home. went down to their place, and Plummer played a critical role in us winning that game. He was a good player, during his career, not a great player, but a good player, but a very bright guy. Was constantly reading, was constantly, doing things that, that smart people do. And as you said, went on to become a judge, and then just, has a terrific life.
Speaking of guys who were smart and well-read and interesting and curious, Tom Meschery probably could have been anything besides a basketball player. Turns out he plays, he's decent, but this is a guy who went on, and he was a teacher. He's been a poet. He's published books. He's a historian. That wasn't all that common. It never has been in professional sports. He had to stand out a little bit to you.
Wonderful human being. Could speak 5 languages.
Wow.
Was a tough player. On the court, a good player. The couple of things I remember about Tommy. Now, the first thing again had to do with the fight. Tommy was under the basket. We were playing against the Warriors with Chamberlain, and Tommy had played with Chamberlain, had been on Chamberlain's team. They were great friends. And Tommy went up for a shot, Wilt blocked it. Tommy went up for another shot, Wilt blocked it. Tommy went up for the third shot, Wilt blocked it, and Tom took a swing at it. And thankfully he did not hit him, because Chamberlain just put his hand on Tom's head, and Tommy was swinging from the floor and never hit him. And Wilt was saying, Tom, don't do it, Tom. and after the game, Meschery, we were saying, what are you doing? And he said, I lost my mind. He said, you know how big and strong Wilt is. He would have killed me.
It's and we're going to get to your run as director of operations with the NBA, and you had to mete out the fines and suspend guys. It's funny. I think everybody who follows the sport and the people who play the sport, they think their generation was the first to invent fighting in pro basketball. And it goes way back, and it's always been a thing. One of the things I saw you say was that back in that day, the fights were a little more prevalent. The officials would let you fight, and rarely did anybody get fined or suspended, right? Do I have all that right?
Well, a big fine in those days was $25.
Yeah.
That was a big fine. And there were a lot of altercations, much more than you obviously see today. The fines are, even for the money these guys make today, the fines are too much, for you to go out and look for, fights. I can remember with Meschery, we're playing in Philadelphia, and he and Chet Walker got kicked out of the game, and the next thing you know, they're back in the back fighting, running at each other. But Tom was a unique guy, with his poetry, with the kind of human being he was, and with what he brought to the table. He was fantastic.
Before I get to Spencer Haywood, I want to ask you about Bob Weiss. I knew Bob very well. He was an assistant here under George while I was a broadcaster. He was a head coach. He's a little bit like you. He devoted his entire life to the game of pro basketball, and he was with you on that first Sonics team. What do you remember about Bob?
Very, very smart player. Was a good player. Could make open shots. Had a very nice career as a player, and has gone on. There are few people that have been around as long as Bob has, in the league. He's still in the league, and just had a great career, but another great guy, good guy to be around, very, very knowledgeable about basketball, and has done an excellent job.
So as the years roll on, you guys get a little better. You get Lenny Wilkins to come to Seattle, and then you get a guy named Spencer Haywood, and he comes after maybe the greatest single season in ABA history. And at the time, the ABA was a free-for-all. Come on in. We don't care what your college status is. You come in and play for us. They wanted the talent. The NBA still had rules. They wouldn't allow a guy to play until his college class had graduated. Spencer came to Seattle and found a kindred spirit in Sam Schulman, the owner of the team, who said, look, he should be allowed to make a living. Now, it sounds funny now to look back on that and think about it, but
yeah,
he's absolutely right. You should be allowed to earn a living. And if somebody wants to pay you to be a pro basketball player, it shouldn't matter what your college status is. Talk about that. You saw that from a lot of perspectives. You saw it from a teammate perspective. And then as you grew and you ended up being a part of a league executive, now by then the rule had long gone, but you saw how basketball could change somebody's life. It certainly changed yours. It took you from a small town in West Virginia and you lived all over the place. What was it like to sit as a teammate and watch Spencer go through some of the stuff he had to go through in fighting a battle that went to the Supreme Court with Sam Schulman?
It was interesting. Spencer, was at loose ends, and Schulman just said, we're going to take him. And we took him. And what are you going to do about it, NBA? And he came and he practiced, wasn't allowed to play in games. And for a time, all he did was practice. And other than Lenny, who was still a great player, Spencer was, by far our best player. You could see it in practice. I mean, the rest of us were like, wait a minute, when are we going to let this guy play? This guy is really good. And but it went on for a while, and we were on the road, I want to say Cincinnati, Chicago, someplace in the Midwest. And Mr. Schulman decided we're going to put him in a game. Told Lenny, put him in a game, and put him in a game, and the rest is history. Spencer went on, made, I don't know if a lot of people know, but Spencer was first team All-NBA at 2 times, second team another time. He was a great player. And when he was young, when he first came with us, he was 27 points and 12 or 13 rebounds a game. Just a terrific player, and you could see it in practice. Spencer got, he got, down that he wasn't able to play. He could not understand why he wasn't able to play, as you pointed out, Mike. And but you could see it. It was just a matter of time. And once they put him in there, he was absolutely terrific. Lenny did something. We had a front line of veteran guys, and Lenny he was bringing Spencer off the bench and bringing Gar Hurd and Don Smith, who became Zaid Abdulaziz. And all of a sudden, he put those guys in the starting lineup, and our team took off. We were, the 1 year we were 46-30 with 6 games to go when Spencer and Dick Snyder got hurt on the same night. We had 6 games left in the season, all on the road. We won the first game when Lee Winfield scored about 35, and that was it. We lost the last 5 games and ended up 47-35 and didn't make the playoffs. But that team was a good team, obviously led by Lenny, who was a great player.
Spencer was on with us and told me a story I had not heard. I was a kid when this was going on, and I had not heard it. And I'm curious as to what it was like. That he said on a handful of occasions, he would be getting ready to start a game, and they would announce on the public address system that there is an illegal player on the floor and the police have been called, and they would escort him out of. Imagine that today. Can you imagine? They should try that with some of the stars now and see if we can get them out of the game. Wow, take me through that. He said it happened in Cincinnati one night. Do you remember those times?
Cincinnati's the one I remember when they did announce it. I do not recall whether they took him out of the arena, the police, but I do remember him announcing there is an illegal player out here.
He said that the police, if I recall right, said they did take him out of the arena, but they got outside and it's cold. And they said, listen, man, we don't even know why we're here. And he got to sit in the squad car with them and listen to the game on the radio with the heat running so he could stay warm. it's amazing. And Spencer had, someone was going to be Spencer Haywood. Someone was going to test this rule, and somebody was going to be Sam Schulman. It just so happens it happened out of Seattle, and it's,
it sure did.
I'm assuming you guys and, the players and the owners, it's always an interesting relationship. I'm going to assume you guys had a tremendous amount of respect seeing how far Schulman was willing to fight this for one of your guys.
You're right. We did. He was a good owner to begin with. As owners go, he also had another partner named Gene Klein, who was main owner of the Chargers football team, and they were in Seattle quite a bit, during the course of the season, and constantly were through their emissaries, letting everybody know they were watching, and we need to do a little bit better. But they were Sam was a good owner.
You near the end of your Seattle career, well, actually after your playing career, you become Lenny's assistant. You move into coaching, and then I saw some note, and I don't understand what this was. I don't know if it was when you were a player or a coach, that you also got a degree from the University of Washington at this time. Well, take me through that. What were you doing?
Well, at the end of my playing career, I had transferred a bunch of credits to the University of Washington, but I still needed 2 semesters or 3 semesters really in order to graduate. And it's something that I definitely was wanted to do. I was thinking at the time about going to law school, when I finished. And so I went to the university and graduated, took a bunch of hours for 3 semesters and ended up graduating that next year.
Well, I'm calling West Virginia, and I'm going to tell them on behalf of the University of Washington, we're taking Thorn. None of this. UW grad, not UWV. UW is we're going to claim you. Did you like coaching as you moved into it? It can be a tough transition from player to coach. Did you like it right away?
I was fortunate that we had, and Lenny was a great guy to work with and for. Lenny Wilkins is one of the nicest, most competent people that this league has ever seen. He's done it all. He's a Hall of Famer as a coach and a player. And if they gave one for a contributor, he'd be that too. So it was great, always great working with him. Tremendous respect for him, and so that was I enjoyed that part of it. I then went on to become an assistant coach with the New York Nets in the ABA, and we had Julius Erving, with whom I was not real familiar at the time, but quickly became a big fan of his. And we won the championship my first year there. Kevin Lockery was our head coach, but Julius Erving was an incredible player also.
There's another, this might have been in Loose Balls, Terry Pluto's book about the ABA. There's a quote from you where you said you're going to join Kevin Lockery's staff, and the ABA and even the NBA in those days was like the wild, wild west. There wasn't a lot of video. You didn't see a whole lot, and everybody's telling you about Julius Erving. And I think you said, man, I didn't believe 90% of what I heard. So I'm like, this guy can't be that good. In fact, he couldn't he?
He was, at the time he played for the Nets, he was our leading scorer, our leading rebounder, our leading assist man, our leading stealer of the ball, our leading shot blocker. He guarded the best forward every night. We had Larry Keenan, who was also a terrific player, but at that time he was not a terrific defensive player. So Julius guarded the best forward every night, and the ABA had a lot of good forwards. He was unbelievable. I've seen him 100 times go to the sideline and reach out and grab a ball with one hand, like you and I would grab a softball.
Right.
He grabbed a basketball like that. It was like, wait a minute, did he just do that again? One night in San Antonio, he's got a breakaway and he got undercut by James Silas, who was a terrific ABA player. And he was about 6 feet off the floor. And if it, again, had been you or I, Mike, we would have fallen on our neck, probably had some serious injury. The guy landed on his feet. You know, when you drop a cat, no matter how you drop it, it always lands on its feet.
Right.
Guy landed on his feet. He was an incredible athlete, and he did something every night that I would look at Kevin, or Kevin would look at me and say, can you believe he just did that? Virtually every night he would do something.
One of the great characters in the sport at that time was an official named Earl Strom. Everybody remembers Earl's name. He came on my show years ago and told me that, I asked him if the story was true, and he said it was, that and back in those days, the officials, the players, the coaches, you'd go out drinking after the game. You'd have some beers. Everybody'd kind of mingle together because you were kind of a traveling carnival type of show. And Earl Strom's out with a couple of reporters after the first game he's officiated with Irving. And he says, I'm telling you, that's the greatest player I've ever seen. And the ABA fines him $50. He said, we can't have a referee saying a player's great. The fans will think you're cheating for him. So Earl Strom sent the ABA a check for $100 and said, here's $50 for my fine, and here's 50 more for you, because I'm telling you, he's the greatest player I've ever seen.
Well, Earl, I know because I was the head of officials for several years. I got to know Earl very well. He was one of the great characters and great referees, in the history of professional basketball. And the stories about him are legend. But as a referee, he was great because he knew how to deal with players.
Right.
And he knew how to, if he saw something getting a little bit out of hand, he knew how to take care of it. Players loved him. And he was, obviously one of the best ever.
We're talking with Rod Thorn. In our second segment, we will touch on the craziest team Rod was ever with. We'll touch on a player he drafted one time that ended up being pretty good. And we'll touch on his 14-year run as what Peter Vesey legendary called the vice president of violence for the NBA. Rod Thorn, our guest on Iconic Sonics. More to come. Iconic Sonics is brought to you in part by Simply Seattle. It's the biggest Sonics apparel store in the world, locally owned by Sonics fans. You can get 15% off your order with the code ICONIC15 at simplyseattle.com. And by the legendary Edgewater Hotel, Seattle's only overwater hotel. It offers unobstructed views of the Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. The Edgewater is the official hotel of Sonics fans everywhere. All right, part two of our conversation with Rod Thorn. And Rod, thanks so much for your time and for the great stories. An original Seattle Supersonic, one of the guys who's coming back when the team comes back. We're going to bring you back and get you in that shirt behind me and put you out there.
I'm ready.
So you're in the ABA, you're with the Nets, and you're an assistant, and you guys win a championship. And like anybody, you probably start feeling like, I'd like to see what it's like to run one of these. I've worked for Lenny and I've worked for Lockery. So like, hey, here's a job for you. Here's the job, the Spirits of St. Louis. And off you go to become a head coach of a team that was loaded with talent, but had one big problem. And Marvin Barnes was the problem, but you had ML Carr, who would go on to have a great career. Don Chaney, great NBA player. Ron Boone, who was around forever. Mike D'Antoni, who more than a player became a coaching legend. Maurice Lucas, Moses Malone. How do you not win 75 games with this team, Rod? The answer may be simple.
I was obviously a young coach and full of spit and vinegar, and I just could never get Marvin to buy into what I was, trying to get he and obviously the rest of the team to do. He was a tremendous talent. He averaged 24 points and 12 rebounds a game, but his head was not with you too many times. And he and Lucas at the same time, and we ended up trading Lucas to Kentucky for Caldwell Jones. And Moses came when Utah folded, and their players that the Spirits wanted came with the Spirits. So Moses and a guy named Randy Denton and Ron Boone came over from them. So with Moses, I had him one game. He had a broken foot, and he really didn't get a chance to play. I think that team would really have been good had he been able to play. But Marvin, I was too young to probably to make the adjustments that you needed to make to try to deal with him. But he was a terrific player.
Well, and there are guys like that in the history of the league. Maybe no one quite to his extent, but the missed practices, missed team buses, missed team planes, and you talk about being a young coach, but also at some point, look, man, you're a young man now. You got to take some responsibility for your own schedule. Hey, is the time machine story true? Did he refuse to get on a flight once because you go from Louisville to St. Louis, and with the time change, the plane was going to arrive in St. Louis 2 minutes before it took off in Louisville, and he was scared to get on? Is that true? Did that really happen?
That was true. That was definitely true. When I asked Don Chaney one time, I said, Don, give me some help with with Marvin. He said, I've been in the NBA for 13, 14 years. I have never seen a guy like this.
Yeah.
I don't know what you do with him.
And it's a shame. And I know he got his life together later and was able to be a contributor and stuff. But and again, there are many other stories, not to pin it all on him. There are many other stories of athletes that just for whatever reason have all the skill in the world, but just can't make it click. Because he was a super talented player.
He probably had more talent than Maurice Lucas, but Lucas went on, in the NBA to be a much better player. Marvin's off the court stuff, I think, caught up with him. He was never the player in the NBA that he was in the ABA because he just, he had lost some of his athleticism and some of the things that made him really good. Lucas went on to, a tremendous career.
I want to hopscotch back a little. Did you try to talk to Marvin that day and explain the time zone thing to him, or did you just, because he didn't get on the plane. I think he took a rental car to go to St. Louis. Did you attempt to explain it to him?
My favorite Marvin story had to do with, I had found him, I can't tell you how many times, and had so many conversations with him about, you're our best player. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. Their team could be so good, et cetera, et cetera. So one night I decide I'll wait till he does something good and we'll have a conversation, an in-depth conversation. So we're playing in Utah and we beat the Utah team. And so I said to Marvin after the game, he played a great game, come up to my room. I want to talk to you. So he came up and we had best conversation I ever had with him. And he said, Coach, I understand. I'm going to do everything you want me to do. I promise you. The next day, he missed the bus. We're going to the airport. We're going to play Denver. And we've got a day off. Not only did he miss the bus, but he missed the plane. So he showed up about 3:00 the day of the game in Denver. Marvin, where have you been? Oh, I had some business to take care of.
It's a heck of a talk you gave him, Coach. It lasted less than 12 hours.
Oh, that was really a good one, wasn't it?
Your coaching career comes to an end and you move into an executive position, and you held various executive jobs with a few different franchises, but I think the one people would remember the most and think about and talk about the most is you're with the Bulls in the early 80s. And here's I think it's the 84 draft, and everybody's talking about Michael Jordan. Now, there are other guys. Sam Bowie, legendary. People always talk about, the Blazers took Sam Bowie. Hakeem Olajuwon's in that draft. There's a ton of talent in that draft. What's it like to be you as it's coming up, and how many people are calling you to see if they can get the pick away from the Bulls to get in a position to take one of these guys?
Well, Mike, Akeem Olajuwon was the number one player in that draft at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody, including me, had I had the first pick in the draft, I would have taken Akeem. We were not interested in Bowie because our doctors said, don't touch this guy.
Oh, wow.
Our Chicago doctors said, this guy's going to have problems. So Jordan was the guy that, that we were interested in. So I had a conversation with the GM of the Blazers about a month before the draft, Stu Inman, and he and I were, reasonably good friends. And I said, have you guys decided who you're going to take? And he said, if Bowie passes our physical, we're going to take Bowie. We have Drexler, we have Jimmy Paxson, who is a terrific player, a wing player. And, so we need a big. And about 3 days before the draft, I called him back and I said, did Bowie pass the physical? And he said, yes, he passed their physical. So I knew going in that we were going to get Jordan. And, I had become good friends with Dean Smith, who was obviously the Carolina coach. And at the end of every year, I would go to Carolina and he would let me sit and watch any of the ACC games that I wanted to watch, any of the Carolina games or other ACC games that they played. And then he would talk to me and tell me what he thought about the various players in the ACC or players they played against. And but the one thing, Dean was, the players didn't stand out that much at North Carolina. Right. I mean, they played a team game and everybody contributed. And but he did say to me, he said, Jordan, I would never say it publicly because I just wouldn't do it. But Jordan is the most talented player I've had. As far as talent goes. I'm not going to say he's the best, but he's the most talented player I've had. So they had some pretty good players there over the course of time. So when we got Jordan, did I think when we got him that he turned out to be what he turned out to be? No way. My feeling was he's going to be a very good player and hopefully he'll be an all-star type player one day. And we had him for about a week. And one of our coaches called me and he said, well, congratulations. And I said, for what? He said, you did not screw this draft up. And I said, really? He said, this guy is really good. And he was.
Who came? Do you remember who came after you for trade? Because other people knew nobody knew he was going to become Michael Jordan and become what he became and have this competitive fire that no one can explain what drove this guy. But there had to be other guys calling you and saying, hey, let us move up. And I mean, did you consider moving at all?
Well, one of my owners, who was the managing partner, had called me and said he had a conversation with the owner of Philadelphia. And they had offered what he thought was a reasonable offer. Did I think we should consider it? And I said, I don't think so. I think, these guys are pretty good veteran players, but I think Jordan's got a higher ceiling. Dallas, I remember calling Rick Sund, a Seattle guy.
Sure.
And Rick was interested in Jordan. And they made us, pretty good offer. They had some good players also, but we never, at least for my part, I can't speak for my owners, but for my part, never was offered anything that I really considered, for him at that time.
So you get shuffled out the next year in Chicago. Do you ever, I mean, things worked out great for you. You end up in the league and really impactful with the league. But did you ever feel yourself going, God, I kind of wish we could have made it work? That might not have been a bad place to be for 10 years.
Well, I think naturally you have some of those feelings from time to time when you
Mm,
saw how it turned out, with Michael. But from my perspective, the team changed hands. There was new ownership that
right.
came in. The team had not been as successful as certainly I would have liked, and I'm sure the people there would have liked. And so they made a change, and I was one of made some changes, and I was one of them. I've always looked at that, Mike, as uh, things aren't going to go swimmingly always, and if they don't, try to understand why they didn't work out and go on to whatever's the next thing. And been very fortunate that way.
Well, and you end up and take me through how you end up in the NBA offices, because you then end up being there during what I think is maybe the most important 15-year or so stretch in the league's history. Jordan becomes a superstar. Magic and Bird are at the end of their thing. A bunch of teams out west get really, really good.
Oh
The
boy.
Bulls have their dynasty. The league grows beyond
Um,
anyone's imagination. Look, take me to the start. How do you end up getting to that NBA job after the Bulls thing changes?
you know, um, I traded options on the Chicago Board of Options Exchange for about 10 months.
Hmm.
And I got a call one day from Russ Granick in the league office asking me if I would be interested in interviewing for the job I ended up taking. And talked it over with my wife, and we had lived in New York obviously before when I was with the Nets in the ABA, and liked it. And so I interviewed. Then I went back and interviewed again and got offered a job and took it. And it was one of the better decisions I think that I've made in my career. In that my kids were growing up at that time, as you point out so succinctly, the NBA was on a really big roll. Starting they had already started, but it really took off. And I can still remember those great finals between the Lakers and the Celtics. When Magic and Bird and Kareem and McHale and all those guys were playing, how great those games were. And then, with the Bulls and Detroit, to finally get through Detroit and how tough those games were. And then, the Bulls playing Seattle and Portland in the finals and Utah twice. It was just a great, great time for the NBA. The NBA went from a respected good league to a super league during that time, and it was just great to be part of it.
And I said earlier that and I always thought this was funny. I don't know if you did, but Peter Vesey hung the vice president of violence nickname on you because Rod Thorn was in
Man.
charge. Whenever there's a fight, Rod Thorn is going to go through, and there was video by then, so you could see what's going on. And you had to decide, okay, who's the instigator, who's getting 2 games or 3 games or no games, who's getting fined. What take me through just an incident, not a specific one, but what would happen? You'd get into work and they go, hey, there was a fight last night in Phoenix. You got to take a look at it. How'd that go?
No, you got to call it home. That's the first thing. And we had, our imprimatur was that if there was someone who had to be suspended, he would always be suspended before the next game.
Right.
So if you had fights on the West Coast, let's say you had a fight on a Friday and somebody's playing on Saturday, you've got to, I can't tell you the calls I would get at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning from referees telling me what, from their perspective, what had happened in some fight in Seattle, in Portland. And so then you get tape of it from wherever you can get it to start out with. You didn't have access to everything back in when I first started. So if you could get it from a TV station, whoever you could get it from, you got it. And you looked at it, you interviewed the participants, and then you ended up doing what you did. But the toughest one ever was there was an altercation between New York and Miami. And when New York was up 3-2, and there was a fight that started 20 seconds before the end of the game. Game was over. New York had won the game. Game was over in Miami. And guys from the Knicks came out on the floor, and we ended up suspending, I want to say 7 or 8 guys, and you did it by alphabetical order. And so the next game, the Knicks had Patrick Ewing out, Larry Johnson out, and Miami beat them, up in New York. And then in the 7th game, New York had the latter part of their roster couldn't play.
Jeez.
and Miami beat them again. Oh my goodness. We got 300 and some letters, and 298 of them were negative.
Nobody was happy.
Negative. Oh boy, that was a tough time. And then living in New York, wow.
Well, and most of these, as you look back on them, there is, I don't know if it's an element of humor, but you can look at it and go, okay, it was confined to the floor, and that just happens. Right. Guys are competitive. They're hyped up. I don't think we're in this job anymore. When the Malice at the Palace happened, they did an entire documentary about that.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm so thankful that that's a one-time deal to this point. Are you surprised that hasn't happened somewhere else, whether it's in the NBA or something else?
Mike, we made a conscious effort to. You're never going to totally do away with fighting. I mean, because the instincts that come in and the emotion that comes in, but we made a conscious effort that we're going to get it as close to zero as we possibly can, and by suspending, fining over the course of time, I think it definitely worked.
Mm-hmm.
And now, you still see, we've had a couple of altercations in the last week, where players have been suspended.
Right.
And you're still going to get some, but you've got all these great athletes. You don't need, it's like, Mike, it's like when our game got too physical, if you will, in that the holding, the grabbing, the chucking cutters, the knocking guys out if they were driving. It went too far that way. So again, consciously, we decided, hey, we don't want our great athletes. You want these people to be able to show what they can do and not have somebody trying to take them out. So we put up, flagrant foul rules. And I think now, some would say that we've gone too far the other way. That is, it may not be as physical as it should be. But to me, the game we have today, some would say there are too many 3-point shots. But this game today is great game. And you get and the smaller players are back in the game. Now they can play. If you can shoot, you can play now. And before, it was almost impossible for them to play because they couldn't move. So, you do what you feel you have to do in order to keep the game moving in the right direction.
I'm in the middle a little. I'd like a little more happy medium, a little more, but I get your point. I mean, I don't necessarily want to go back to the days of an NBA Finals game having a final score of 74-69. It's fun to watch a little offense out there. Before we let you go, and thanks again for being so generous with your time, I want to ask you about a guy that you worked for a lot of years, and he is a controversial figure out here. People will lay the Sonics departure at the feet of David Stern. It's not really fair. There was a lot that happened, and there's a lot of different perspectives on that. I would assume there was a part of you that was a little heartbroken when that happened. You don't want to see a team that you played for get moved. Out here, the heartbreak is deep and it's real, and it's still very, the wound hasn't healed. Right. I don't think it will. Tell me a little bit about working for David Stern and what that was like, and then maybe any thoughts you had when the Sonics departed.
Well, as far as thoughts, I was, like any Seattleite would be, I was upset about it, because knowing what a great NBA city Seattle was and had been, hated to see it happen. David Stern is probably arguably the best commissioner in the history of sport. Certainly one of them. What he did to move the NBA along, I think, was unbelievable. Very, very smart guy. He knew more about television than the guys that ran television companies did. He knew more about PR than top PR people. He just knew. He was an authority on virtually every part of the business, and he loved basketball on top of it. That was, he didn't, he hadn't been a player, at all, but he loved the game. He loved the players. I can't say enough good things about him. From a personal perspective, I learned incredible amount from him. And he did, moving Seattle out of Seattle was not something that he really wanted to do.
Do you see, there's a belief out here, and you read the signs a little bit. It feels like the NBA wants to come back, and the timing's got to be right. The owners have to agree to divide the pot. They've got to make sure they get as much for an expansion team as they need to. It's going to be more than the $30 you were paying rent to get a franchise back here when your rookie year. I'm sure you read this stuff, and again, you have a vested interest having some time out here. Are you optimistic about that path existing, about the NBA getting back to this city?
Something, Mike, I think it'll definitely happen. As to when expansion will occur, I certainly am not prescient enough to know that, but I think in a timely fashion that there will be an expansion, and I think Seattle will be at the head of the list.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm sure Adam Silver. Call him and tell him that. Say, hey, I just told the Sonics guys you're coming back, so get on it, Commish. He seems to be a worthy successor to David Stern. And again, from the Seattle perspective, everything gets skewed. But when you look at the league itself, it's like, boy, they're blowing along. Everything seems to be going pretty good for the NBA.
Adam has done a wonderful job. David set the table, and Adam has kept it moving. He's done a great job.
I want to wrap it up with something we're calling 5 quick questions. I don't know, this may be like asking who your favorite kid is, but give it a little bit of thought and see. I'll give you 5 quick questions here. Your favorite all-time teammate. Who's Rod Thorn's favorite teammate?
My favorite, Lenny Wilkins.
Lenny Wilkins, good answer. Favorite guy to coach, not Marvin Barnes.
M.L. Carr.
M.L. Carr on that same team.
Loved M.L. Carr.
M.L. Carr. Favorite guy you dealt with as an executive? I mean, you could say Jordan, I guess you drafted, but somebody in your executive career, you were with other teams too, that you like dealing with.
I had a pretty good relationship with most everyone. I enjoyed Bob Ferry, who was in Washington. I always enjoyed him. He was, if you want to make a deal with Bob, here's what I'll give you. Okay. He'd say yes or no.
That's it. How about, you talked about when you were the discipline guy, you had to talk to the people that were involved. So I'm going to assume some players were funny about it. Some players were angry. Who was the guy you enjoyed talking to about, hey, Tell me about this fight. Who was funny to talk to in the discipline days?
Oh man, Anthony Mason was tough to talk to. Bill Lanebeer
Yeah.
was tough to talk to.
Well, you had to have him on speed dial.
Oh man, probably the funniest guy to talk to was Charles Barkley.
Yeah, I figured
from
that.
Time to time, he would cross my desk, and he was always hilarious.
Finally, your favorite, boy, this goes back a ways, whether it was a contemporary that you played with or somebody you coached or were an executive or just watched. Who's your favorite player of all time? Not the greatest NBA player ever, just your favorite guy, a guy you'd sit down and watch if he was on NBA TV right now.
Julius Erving.
Yeah.
Because of all of the great players that I've been around, he was the best teammate. He always thought about the other players on the team. He was always doing things to help them. He was a special teammate.
True story about Dr. J. And my wife, we've been married for 30 years, and she's not starstruck by guys. It's just not her style. We were at a party during the 96 finals. We're at a party, and I look up and I can't. I said, "Where is she?" And I talk, says, "Have you seen Renee?" And they go, "She got in a cab. She's going downtown to the Four Seasons because she heard Julius Erving's holding court at the Four Seasons, so she went down to meet him." So that's how big the doctor was. And even she was like, "No, I got to go say hi to him. He's a big deal."
He was unbelievable. Well, I'm gonna give you one quick story here before we quit about Dr. J. Larry Keenan was probably average 17, 18 points a game for us, and he loved to score. And he had a couple of games where he was under 10, and he was sort of morose. And as Kevin gave his pregame talk and the players are going out, we're playing Indiana, and Julius and George McGinnis are 1-2 in scoring. I forget who was ahead, but both of them are averaging 29 plus. So Doc sort of stayed back and he said to Kevin, "Don't worry about Keenan. I'll take care of him tonight." So in the first quarter, every time Julius got the ball, he drove and he found Keenan. And Keenan had 12 points in the first quarter. And Keenan goes on to score 20-some points in the game, all smiles. And Julius scores like 18 in the game, and McGinnis has his normal 30, 29-30. So we win the game. Game's over. We come back in, and Julius just winked at Kevin. I told you, I'd take care of him, and I did.
You said a great teammate. And the guy said, we gotta get this guy. Meanwhile, 13-year-old me's an Indiana fan going, "What the heck? How come we can't stop Larry Keenan? Where did this guy come from?" Roddy, it's a delight. It's a delight to talk to you. I knew this would be fun. I had no idea it'd be this much fun, and we could go for hours. Congratulations on the Hall of Fame. I mean,
thank you.
It's about 4 years ago, I guess now, and well earned given all the stuff you have done in basketball. Are you still active in any way? Do you consult anybody?
I am. I do some consulting for the Washington Wizards.
All right. So you're just not going to stop, are you?
Oh, I enjoy it. It's great. I did some work for Milwaukee for 3 years, and got to watch Giannis, come up and become a great player. And so it's been very, very fortunate, Mike, to still be around it, to some degree, and just enjoy the games, enjoy the NBA.
Marcus Johnson was on with us, who's now a broadcaster with Milwaukee, and told us about leaving a game one night. And he says that the traffic's kind of held up because some guy's running through the cars. He's like, "Who is that fool running through the car?" And he looks and it's Giannis. He's jogging from the arena over to the practice facility to do some post-game workouts because he wasn't happy with his game. The great ones always want to get better, don't they?
It's they do, and where in Seattle, so many great players are coming out of Seattle now. It's amazing.
Yeah, Yeah, we get a team back here, there'll be even more. That's hopefully what's going to happen next. Rod, it's great to talk to you. And thanks for reminiscing with us, and congratulations on a great career that is ongoing. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. I appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Enjoyed it.
Rod Thorn, legendary NBA figure and member of the NBA, or actually the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, our guest on Iconic Sonics. Thanks for joining us on Iconic Sonics, and thanks to all of our sponsors who make the show possible. And Rod Thorn, we can't thank him enough for a great visit today. We've got more Iconic Sonics for you. You can get information on other shows and learn about upcoming guests by going to iconicsonics.com. I'm Mike Gastineau. See you next time on Iconic Sonics.